my kids, they're changing like every week, right? Like I have a 4-year-old daughter, and my son is 2, Stella and Miles, and they're my world, right? Like life before them and life after them, it's just crazy. I was just reflecting with my wife. It's been like 10 years since we were living in the West Loop. And the idea of moving out of Chicago was just like this pipe dream. And since then, like, we've moved to California, we moved to the East Coast, we came back, and I'm like, can you believe it? It's been 10 years. And like, now we've got 2 littles. Like it's wild. And that process of like, prioritizing it is somewhat instinctual too, right? Like I think that, there's always this fear sometimes that, new parents or folks that are thinking about, becoming parents have about like, oh, how am I going to do everything? And a lot of it is that like, it's just kind of takes over, and you get a sense of like what you can do, what you can get away with, how much sleep you actually need. Those type of things start emerging. And then, beyond that, it's just like, it's an experiment. It's a learning process for myself and my wife and my kids. And the biggest thing for me is looking at them, knowing that they're developing and they're growing and everything's new for them. So I use that opportunity to kind of invite the novelty back into our lives.
I Am Consciously Curious, a podcast for those that are searching for meaning and fulfillment in their lives. My name is Victor Chan, and I'm on a mission to find out why people do what they do. I've interviewed white-collar to blue-collar, entrepreneurs to passion projects, and life is just too short to not produce meaningful work. Thanks for tuning in. We're live. Jeff Vadukumcherry, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to see you. It doesn't happen too often, but I do enjoy when strangers become friends.
Yeah. We grabbed coffee that one day, and I came home, and then my wife is like, "Oh, you got a new best friend now?" So she was excited to hear about our coffee chat, and it's good to be here. Good to connect.
Yeah, it's there's so much to navigate, and one of the things out of several things that we talked about, whether it's like juggling the live to work, the work to live, how to incorporate some creativity and agency back into the thing that pays the bills.
Yeah.
And if there's any way to overlap the two and amalgamate the two. Or if it has to be separate, if there's no way, can we carve out enough time to do the thing that fills you up? It's a little bit about the immigrant journey. And speaking of my wife and I, we did get to try that too, with from Chef Margaret Pak and Vanud from Kerala.
How'd you like it?
It was really good. It was really good. And then the episode I'm about to publish, Chef Zubair, he's on a mission to showcase Indian food in other ways besides chicken tikka masala and butter chicken. No naan on the menu. And I love what they're doing at Mira and Coach House in the city. And I still have to go to Coach House. It's their prefix menu.
That's awesome.
At Coach House, yeah.
I mean, South Asian food is very different from North Indian food.
Okay.
Yeah, it's my wife is Tamil, so I get a little bit of the Tamil side from her mom's cooking. I'm a Malayali. I'm from Kerala, and then I get that experience from my mom's side. So we've just got like a fusion of like South Indian flavors in our home at any given time.
Is Tamil on the southeast, or is it still southwest-ish?
Southeast.
It is southeast. Okay.
Yeah, it's a neighboring state actually.
Okay. Wow.
A lot of similarities, but also like slight nuances and things like that. Coconut and everything.
Yeah. Before we get too deep in the weeds, I'm not sure if Nissan's listening or Knut's listening, but I also love when there's a Venn diagram moment.
Yeah.
Sometimes the world can feel small, and it's great. And can't wait to see what other Venn diagrams we might have. But that being said, to kind of just kick it off, I don't even remember if we met in January, but it feels like several months ago. Since then, how has like 2025 been going for you?
It's been good. Still feels like new energy, new space. I just got back from a cousin's engagement in Dallas.
Okay.
So that's where I was last week, and I'm doing new things, trying new things. Still busy with all of the usual things, but trying to take advantage of some of the spaces of time that I have to get out and do things like this.
Yeah. Do you think about trying to overlap a lot of the things in your life to squeeze out as much juice? Because I know you're committing to the photo a day project. So like, do you look for ways? Do you actively look for ways to stack things on top of each other?
Sometimes I think, if anything, the photo a day journey is more of the it's the thing that's happening in the background that makes me maybe take that extra step or walk down that path that I wouldn't usually consider. And a lot of the times, I find myself just kind of stagnant throughout the day, and I'm like, oh, I got to grab the picture for today. Let me just take that extra stroll or something like that. So I do create those type of opportunities a little bit more because of that. And there's not a lot of variance in a weekday, in the sense of like, hey, I'm going to work, I'm dropping the kids off, I live in the suburbs, so
and you're primarily working in the surbs, right? It's just like
I'm in the suburbs, man. So there's the Costco trips, right? There's the little adventures here and there. So you do find a way to really look at the extraordinary in the ordinary, right?
Yeah. It's just like I was going to ask, like, do you find yourself like seeking or finding the novelty in the mundane, or do you feel like it's another task you have to check off, as far as like, I got to get this photo for the sake of getting a photo? And I guess there's no right or wrong with that, but I think over time, having that objective might lead to seeking, like, observing novelty in the mundane.
Yeah. I mean, I try to give myself grace with it, right? Like sometimes I might not capture, a picture that day, but I might have two awesome pictures, the next day.
There's wiggle room.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to beat myself up over it, right? But the area where I don't let myself slip is like, Sunday comes around, I better have 7 pictures for the week, right? Like that's kind of my baseline. And sometimes they're disparate, sometimes they tell a story, sometimes there's a theme. But I think it's also important to give yourself that space and that fluidity, because sometimes the novelty can emerge in that fluidity.
You're also a father. You're a husband and father, your son. At this point in time, like, how would you prioritize everything? Like, maybe top 5, like, going on in your life, from family, or more specifically, son, husband, father, work, creativity. Like, how would you prioritize?
Yeah. I think, candidly speaking, I am always thinking about, finance to some degree, and whether that's my job or how I provide for my family, because if I can't do that, then I can't take care of my family. And of course, my family is like the most important thing for me, and they come first, but I'm also thinking about the options in front of me to like help them with what they need whenever they need it, right? So that's how I think of providing. So those two things are very interchangeable. I think a lot of people might also feel that way. Some people might not admit it, but to me, like, that's kind of the thought process that I kind of go through. And once I cross that off, it's really like, all right, my kids, they're changing like every week, right? Like, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and my son is 2, Stella and Miles, and they're my world, right? Like, every life before them and life after them, it's just crazy. I was just reflecting with my wife. It's been like 10 years since we were living in the West Loop. And the idea of moving out of Chicago was just like this pipe dream. And since then, like, we've moved to California, we moved to the East Coast, we came back, and I'm like, can you believe it? It's been 10 years. And like, now we got two littles. Like, it's wild. And that process of like prioritizing it is somewhat instinctual too, right? Like I think that, there's always this fear sometimes that, new parents or folks that are thinking about, becoming parents have about like, oh, how am I going to do everything? And a lot of it is that like, it's just kind of takes over, and you get a sense of like what you can do, what you can get away with, how much sleep you actually need. Those type of things start emerging. And then, beyond that, it's just like, it's an experiment. It's a learning process for myself and my wife and my kids. And the biggest thing for me is looking at them, knowing that they're developing and they're growing and everything's new for them. So I use that opportunity to kind of invite the novelty back into our lives.
Yeah, you saying that reminds me of Breaking Bad.
Really?
Walter White of like, I'm doing it for my family.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And then at what point is it for yourself?
Yeah.
I wonder if you've like through this process discovered that like your kids don't care about the money. Right? It's just like,
they don't even understand the concept of money, right?
Why isn't dad spending time with me? And that's just assuming, right? Like we're so consumed with what can I do to provide, and what if everything is provided for, and then you continue hustling for the sake of hustling, and we then sacrifice the time,
Yeah. And for me, it's more visceral because I work at home. So when they're home, they see me in front of the computer sometimes, and like it's in their face, and they can't separate the fact that like, hey, this is my work and this is my job. To them, I'm just in front of the computer, and my daughter's like, Dad's busy, and sometimes they'll mock me and they'll be like, look at me, Dad, I'm busy, because that's what I say to them, right? So it is a little bit more visceral for me, and that's a good reminder of like how to keep things in balance and humanize what's important, right?
Yeah. Did you guys have any expectations when you found out you were pregnant, or is it more so just goals? I come from a family of boys, so I always thought like, maybe we're gonna have a boy first. So when when we found out we were having a girl, it was kind of like, whoa, like I wasn't, I guess, I should have been prepared for that outcome, but it really it kind of threw me for one. And and then I was like, oh, how am I going to be a girl dad? Right. Like this is, I was preparing to like throw the ball around and all kinds of things that, and who knows, maybe you still will.
Yeah. But it ended up becoming this like beautiful journey of like wow, I am honored that I get to be a girl dad, right? This is incredible, right? And then I had my son, and I'm like, great, we got one of both, and the contrast and the duality, we didn't have expectations, right? We prayed for healthy children, and my daughter was born in 2020 during COVID. And actually we were one of the first people to get COVID in March of 2020 while my wife was pregnant.
Oh my goodness.
And my entire family got it. It was crazy. It was at a time when we didn't really understand what COVID was. So I just wanted to get on the other side of that, and we did, right? But
having it together, you were able to quarantine together, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, so it was interesting in the sense that my wife was really sick, and she got taken to the ER. Then my dad got really sick, and he got taken to the ER, and I couldn't go anywhere because I had COVID and I had to stay home. And then my mom got COVID. And,
oh my goodness!
And then my sister was the only one who was asymptomatic, and bless her soul, she was taking care of us. But we had so many things going on at that time with, an offer on a house that we were putting in after we moved back to Chicago. to thinking about like what really matters and like health and all that stuff. So coming out of that experience and having my daughter be born and everything that like happened afterwards, like, you know, it completely changed our perspective. We were so grateful to find like, you know, beauty in everything afterwards. And
How long did that last for you guys?
it was, I mean, COVID was in March. She was born in May. So it was like a few nerve-wracking months of like, hey.
Well, how long were you guys quarantining for, or like symptomatic for?
I had that OG strain. So I was like quarantining for a week, but it took like 3 weeks for me to like feel better. And like my lungs were like really
some
hurting.
people had long COVID.
Yeah. It was rough. I want to say it took me a good month before like I felt like I was like back to myself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that being said, you've mentioned here and there that you spent some time on both coasts, East and West Coast, which I guess is a good segue to into tech recruiting. And it's just like, I know Julius has been on, but I'm sure there's more to learn about the industry and how one finds themselves in tech recruiting specifically.
Yeah, I think most recruiters will tell you they just kind of fall into it.
Okay.
That's how it happened for me. I studied political science in college at UIC.
Yeah,
I thought I thought at the time I wanted to become a lawyer, an attorney, and I quickly realized that's not the type of job that I envisioned.
Who were some inspirations for law?
At the time I was really interested in the arts, in the entertainment industry. I knew that being a pure, creative, or at least at the time I was like, oh, maybe that's not the most stable pursuit, just something that's purely creative.
Like acting or cinematography or photography, videography?
A little bit more on like the photography side of things, a little bit of music back in the day. But I saw like, these adjacent connections to the entertainment industry, like law. And like, maybe I can pursue entertainment law. And then it slowly morphed into things about, the government. This was like back in 2008 when Barack Obama was running for office. So there was this like free-form exploration of like not really knowing where I wanted to be, but knowing that I was good with language, good with words, and at the time thinking that, hey, maybe I can make a difference, in some aspect of government, or if that didn't work out, maybe some aspect of entertainment law.
Yeah. And that was still vague enough to where law was the path, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because part of it was like, I don't want to study any more math. I wasn't terrible at it, but I was like, I don't want to do that. And when by the time I graduated, I really wasn't any more clear about what I wanted to do.
Did you do any extracurriculars while at UIC?
I interned for Dan Seals, who was running against Mark Kirk at the time. I worked at Apt Electronics for a bit.
Yeah.
That was like my college job. So I had some exposure into like, a family business and like e-commerce and like what was happening at that level. But the reality is at the time, like I was completely unaware of like what options there were.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested like how you just kind of left the entertainment stuff on the wayside.
Yeah. Yeah, it's maybe a little bit of that has to do with kind of the classic immigrant pressure of like wanting to, live up to your parents' expectations and things like that. Maybe coming from a family of folks who are medical professionals and things like that. It just never really seemed like a viable career path. It was more like a hobby, even though I was getting feedback in areas like, hey, you're actually pretty good at photography, or you're kind of good with the camera. Maybe you should kind of take this a little bit more seriously. But like I never completely let it disappear into the wayside. I think I still found ways to attach myself to different like creative areas. Like even when I got into recruiting, you know, there was a gravitation towards like the creative side of things.
Or I guess, at what point did you leave law altogether? Like, were you considering taking the LSATs?
Oh yeah. I was considering it. I was studying for it. I think it was around like senior year of college where I was just like, this doesn't feel right.
Like months into studying, and you're like, this isn't.
Yeah.
I'm not feeling compelled to continue studying this.
Yeah, and it was like further explorations with like, you know, other friends of friends, some of whom were lawyers, and learning about some of the contracts that they were reading, and like how they were spending their time, how they were charging by like 5-minute increments, and you know, reading texts that were like the size of phone books. And I'm like, oh, this does not seem like where I want to be. So that was where I started closing the chapter on that. But
it
story.
was still at that point where you found meaning through work, though. You were valuing the type of work at that point in time. Because, I mean, if you just looked at the lifestyle of a typical attorney, it could be nice, depending on if you're in the public or private sector. But most live a nice, you know, great lifestyle, I think. Yeah.
There's a lot of, you know, it's more than just a lifestyle, right? There's like a prestige that comes into it. There's, you know, a potential network, there's positioning, there's opportunity into maybe certain business opportunities. So there's a lot of direction. There's also like a running joke that like most people go to law school because they don't really know what they want to do, right? So there's a lot of different ways to interpret it. I at least for myself, I knew that this wasn't going to be a viable path. But I also didn't know what was going to.
Yeah. So what were you doing to explore then the possible paths? Like how do you create potential paths for yourself?
Yeah, the thing I guess I was doing in the background without being completely aware of it at the time was being open to open to connection, open to networking with people, and I've got a lot of great group of friends, and they're all kind of different from one another, and like I spend time hanging out with different groups, and I kind of
like these are different friend circles.
Oh, yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, and I think that gave me a lot of exposure to different possibilities, whether it was like folks I went to high school with, or my friends that my Indian friends that I knew from my church, or just other friends that I've met in like the workplace and things like that.
It's something I appreciate now. I feel similar with the number of friend circles I have, but I think in high school, like with the multiple friend circles, or I felt like a loner in high school. Like there wasn't one group, one core group, I guess.
Yeah, I can relate.
But it's something I appreciate these days. And I'm sure it was for you on your wedding day of like bringing all these friend circles together.
That was interesting. I had to choose like one person from each friend group, right, to stand there with me. So it was interesting. But to get back to your question, right, I think it was also driven by like curiosity, right? Like just wanting to understand what people do, what options were out there. And I think I've always had that kind of curiosity piece. And by the time that I did get into recruiting, out of college, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. But I had a friend who worked or who got a job at a small recruiting agency, and he's like, "Hey, we're hiring. I think this might be something you're good at." And I was like, "All right, let me explore it," without really having any understanding of like what the recruiting industry is. So I went in for an interview, and I got the job. I quickly realized that it was essentially a sales job, because when you're working for a small agency, you're doing a lot of business development, you're getting new clients, and then you're helping staff some of their positions. So, part of it was recruiting and finding people. The other part was, business development. So one of the things that it did for me immediately was opened me up to the possibility of what was out there, right? Like in terms of industry, in terms of all of the different roles in corporate that I didn't even know about.
So this first recruiting role wasn't in tech. It was just a recruiting role?
Yeah, it was a smaller agency that focused on staffing engineers for like manufacturing companies, electrical companies. They did a little bit of everything.
Yeah. What do you think your friends saw in you that was a good fit?
I think I've always had a technical aptitude, putting things together, breaking things apart. And he and I, often discussed about a lot of things around science and technology and sci-fi. And the job itself wasn't rocket science, right? Like, so there was, this is still kind of true. It's a lower barrier to entry. It was just a matter of figuring out some of the basics and fundamentals, and then being able to talk to people. And he thought I had some of those dimensions.
What were the minimum like prereqs? Was it a bachelor's degree?
Some firms do require it, but some don't. I don't think you need one.
So to get into this industry, it's a low barrier.
It is just pretty low.
Okay, which isn't a bad thing. I'm just
Yeah, no, it's a great thing actually.
But to climb the ranks, you still I get this sense that you need a high level of empathy.
Yeah.
You need the ability to see potential.
Yeah.
And I wonder if your commission is based on how long someone stays with a certain role.
There are aspects of the contract where it's like, hey, somebody has to be employed in the role for 30 months. Otherwise, like the company gets a refund back. But the other piece is really like, when you're trying to play matchmaker for, a company's needs and a person who's looking for a job, you have to understand what makes the person tick, and you have to understand like what their motivations are, what their skills are, and you have to be objective about those things. And to your point, you have to be able to kind of take a look at potential also, like not just where is somebody today, but where can they be.
So are you given a script to ask these people? And that being said, the great recruiters probably go above and beyond and maybe create an environment where the potential, the applicant feels comfortable enough to be vulnerable with you.
Yeah. There are definitely scripts, right? I think earlier in my career, I wasn't leaning on aspects of authenticity as much, right?
Yeah.
You're maybe selling the company a little too hard or selling the opportunity a little too hard. But as you, or at least as I've grown in my career, I've learned to put like a big amount of importance and emphasis on that authenticity piece, because at the end of the day, like you want to create that sense of trust between you and these potential professional acquaintances.
Are these acquaintances, do you see them as long-term acquaintances, or after they find this good fit, do you ever hear from them again?
Oh yeah. It's very much a long-term game.
Oh wow.
I think that, it depends on the industry and the type of staffing you do. But there's so many instances where you network and you meet with people, maybe you set them up for interviews and things don't work out, and then you keep them top of mind when another opportunity arises, and that second opportunity might be it might be the one, it might not be the one, but you're continuing to build your rapport with that person, you're keeping up with them and understanding like what's going on in their life, and then when something else comes on your desk that's a match, like, hey, they're top of mind, right? So that's very much like a year-long process for someone like me who's in it and who's recruiting. But the nature of the role has a lot to do with it too, right?
Okay. How long in that role did it take for you to feel like you had a grasp on things, or a solid understanding, or maybe a knack for this thing, this natural proclivity to being good at this stuff?
Yeah. I'll tell you that 3 months into it, I felt like quitting still.
Okay.
3 months into it, I couldn't get anybody hired. Doing the business development was hard. And I was like, maybe this is not for me,
Okay.
right? And there were certainly aspects to it that I enjoyed, but I hung around and I stuck it out, and I got my first placement, and it was such a rewarding feeling, like helping somebody get an opportunity they were genuinely excited about. And then I had a few more, and then it became about learning like the business side of things, right? I studied political science, so I had a couple of business classes, but I wasn't completely well versed in some of this stuff. So that aspect of how companies work, how they run, how they staff, how they build, how they scale, all of those topics started becoming more and more interesting. And that's what kept me motivated. And, eventually I changed my agencies and I went in-house. And when you go in-house, it's the other side of the fence. Basically, you're no longer playing matchmaker for a variety of clients. You're really a brand ambassador for one particular company, and you're hiring for that company, right? So that brought on a different hat and a different way to look at things, and also a lot more learning.
Yeah. Was that an easy decision, or was it maybe because it was an upward move? Going to just one company?
Yeah. It was. The timing was interesting because I made the move in house like 2 or 3 years in after working in an agency environment. An agency can be a little bit of a boiler room, right? You're supposed to be billing. You're supposed to be developing new business and making placements. And after a few years of that, I was starting to get burnt out to the point where like I was considering going back into school. And I was like, hey, let me completely change it up a little bit. Now that I know a little bit more about these industries and jobs and different functions, I felt like going back to school made sense now because I know how to attack like the aspects of my education that I really want to go after.
Were you thinking like a MBA or what, something else?
I was actually at the time I was thinking computer science.
Okay.
This is maybe like 2012 or something like that, 2013, where the boot camps were starting to pop up, but not quite established.
Through Google?
What's that?
They were like, there's Google like boot camps too, like free Google.
Oh yeah,
boot camps, like certificates.
But there were also places like Dev Boot Camp here in Chicago that my friend had attended, and at the time I think it was like maybe $10,000 or $12,000 that you'd pay for like a 3-month course, and you come out of that and you get like a almost 6-figure job.
And is that title like software engineer?
It varied, I think, depending on the company. By a function of like your experience level at that point, I think most people got junior level like software developer jobs. Still paid pretty well.
Yeah.
And then the boot camp thing kind of fizzled out. So like
in general, or fizzled out for you?
Well, no. For me, I actually applied to DePaul, got into DePaul, and I was gonna maybe pursue a CS degree because like prior to UIC, I had a pretty nice engineering scholarship to IIT. Didn't take it.
Oh wow! Were your parents gunning for that?
Yeah. I still hear it from my dad. Like he still likes to give me a hard time about it.
Despite how successful you're at now.
I wasn't a full ride or anything, but it was enough to like be like, hey, that's something you should have really considered.
Yeah.
So all this to say, I've been a little technical in the background throughout the years. And I thought maybe then it was time to kind of take it a little bit more seriously with like a formal CS degree. And that's about the time that I got a job at Accenture in-house. Okay. And after working on commissions, I was actually working on a draw. And a draw is basically like you get a salary like every week or every other week, and it draws into the red for you. So every time you get a commission check, it basically takes you back into the green. So if you have like a few weeks where you're not billing, you can be in the red. So even though you are getting,
but you're still getting a pay.
You're still getting a paycheck.
So a red meaning like getting cut?
No, it just means like you're in a negative balance in terms of standing, right?
Jeez.
Like let's say you're getting paid, I'm just throwing arbitrary numbers, like $1,000 a week or something. And, 5 weeks go by and you haven't billed anybody, you're in the red for 5,000.
I've never heard of that model before.
Yeah, it's called like a draw.
Okay.
And a lot of agencies, recruiting agencies, and other sales jobs in the past, they've operated with this model. The plus here is that there's really no cap on your earnings, so a lot of upside if you bill really
if you're
well,
financially incentivized.
Yeah. So for me to go in-house, it was a switch from a draw to having a little bit more of like your steady paycheck where I'm still getting measured on my performance. But I didn't have to kind of worry about the grind from that perspective and the hustle of it. It was more around like the strategy of building teams and an opportunity to learn, and Accenture was really cool. Like it was hired to Acuity Group, which was a small agency in Chicago. Well, it wasn't small, it was pretty big, but Accenture had just bought them, and they were integrating them into their larger practice. And I came in at a time where I got to see a lot of that and like help build process. And I looked at the opportunity and I was like, I'm going to try to learn as much as I can here. So I decided not to go back to DePaul.
Okay.
Or pursue or move forward.
Did you pay a dime yet?
No,
okay,
not at that point. Yeah. So even then, I wasn't entirely sure of my decision. I felt like the universe was giving me right signals, like, hey, you're kind of good at this. Maybe keep pushing to see what you can uncover. And partly I succeeded there because of my manager, Cindy McLinn, who took a chance on me and hired me. She's from Texas, and I think at the time she recalled saying that like she really liked some of my Midwestern values that I presented in the interview process, for what it's worth.
Did they get a lot of transplants then? Like, because this was or what do you mean? So she was interviewing from.
She was based in Texas.
Sorry. Okay.
And
gotcha.
she was hiring me, and I was going to be here in the Chicago office.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I mean, I took the opportunity and I ran with it, and I was like promoted twice in 2 years. And by the time I left Accenture, I was like managing a team of like 10 people.
Wow.
So it was quite the, education for me.
Would you attribute the difference in how fulfilling it was at Accenture to a managerial role or something else?
It was partly due to the variety of people that I was meeting.
Okay.
Right now, you are in a place where there isn't like this broad, diversity in terms of like all of these jobs across all these different industries. You're working with professionals that are pretty plugged into like their interest, whether it's like software engineering or UX design or mobile engineering or whatever role that they were doing. They were really excited about it, and that meant that like now you're working with people that are doing this at scale, doing this for bigger companies, and in some regards like helping redefine standards, right? And then this ties back into kind of the community aspect. Like you're now thinking about the, let's say, front-end developer community here in Chicago, and you're meeting people, and you're being, you're helping organize conferences and things like that. So there's suddenly a lot more to kind of anchor to and learn from and help promote. And I think those are the things that, accelerated my interest in wanting to level up there.
Yeah. Okay. So more growth, like personal growth as well, and more a variety of interests as well. You mentioned some like developing processes. Like what specific processes did you develop?
Well, when you have like a smaller company and they're, let's say they get bought out and now they're part of a bigger company, there could be a lot of disconnect, right? From basic things like the culture of the two companies to kind of processy stuff, how they get things done. They might value different aspects, especially like in the recruiting process and how they structure interviews. So reconciling some of those processes to make things more streamlined, to find efficiencies, to really tease out like the right signals that we're looking for that would get successful people successfully through the process.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the processes that I think about when I think about recruiting infrastructure and recruiting playbooks.
Yeah. It's so meta. Like, I feel like at this point in time, you could be a consultant to recruiting. It's so fucking meta.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and I didn't know the rabbit hole went like this far, right? And there's a lot to it. Like in one sense, it's like program management. In one sense, it's sales. In one sense, there's like a psychological element to it. And then when you get into like different specialties of recruiting, whether it's like healthcare recruiting or tech recruiting, there's a whole industry worth of stuff to kind of learn there.
So tell me about then your next transition, and then whether it was an opportunity that presented itself or you were actively seeking opportunities.
Yeah, so the next one was even more interesting because so to paint the picture here, it's like 2014.
Okay.
I am, just at the early phase of my relationship with my wife, my girlfriend at the time then. And we have been together for maybe about a year or so, and she's got a job that she likes, and she has an opportunity to take a better job internally with their company, and that's in San Francisco.
Okay.
So I tell her, hey, do what you got to do, take the job. Well, I'll figure something out, without having any sense of like
meaning you'll travel with her.
Well, at the time I was thinking I'll apply to jobs and maybe I can find something out in San Francisco.
Yeah. And this is coming. You were in West Loop at the time?
I was in West Loop at the time. Finally feeling like I had kind of a grip, right? Like I got a job. We're doing okay. I'm like, why would I ever want to leave Chicago? I'm like a Chicago native, right? In all sense. And so I encouraged her to apply. She got the job, and she's like, they want me to move out in a few months. So I was like, all right, I better get busy applying. And, I just started applying to all kinds of companies. And of course, I applied to your big companies like Google and your small startups that people hadn't heard of. Applied to places like GoPro because I thought like video was going to be cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
Now we got the Insta 360s.
So it was just basically throwing my resume everywhere.
Were you prioritizing different industries or niches?
I was open to different product areas, but I knew I wanted to be in tech at that point.
Okay. Like you saw potential in tech?
Yeah.
Or was tech booming at that time?
Tech was booming.
Okay.
I was familiar with tech. The salaries in tech were good.
Are there wide disparities in recruiting amongst different industries?
I think so. I think tech. It's a little bit different now, but from that 2015 to 2020 period. You can go get a computer science degree and within 2-3 years be making a few $100,000 a year, right? Like doctor money. And at the time I was advising all my younger cousins like, hey, before you consider med school, think about a tech job because, it's not as much in terms of schooling. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of lateral moves you can make as well, once you get a footing. So to me, it just seemed like a lot more upside and opportunity at the time. And I still think that's the case, although you got to adjust to some parameters for the current state of the market. But I've always been very pro tech in that sense.
Okay. And did you land a dream role?
So there was this company my friend told me about at the time called Uber, and I was like, what do they do? Like, you just order a cab and it'll pick you up and you don't pay. And it was so confusing to me. And they had a Chicago presence where it was starting to take off. And I just threw my application in there, and it was one of the few jobs where like I didn't know anybody, and I just applied, and I remember one of the questions on the application was like, tell me something else, or is there anything else you want to tell us about yourself that isn't like obvious on your resume? And I was just like, I make one mean hell of a guacamole dish. I was like, what's there to lose? Like, if there's a person reading this on the other side, like they'll get a laugh at the very least, right?
Were you at the point where it's like, if you didn't care if you didn't get it then, or like what, you were so laissez-faire with it?
Well, I mean, I was very much actively like applying.
Yeah.
And you know, Google was another company that I had reached out and was also interested in interviewing me. So I knew from an experience and skill standpoint that, like, you know, maybe
you were pretty competitive already?
Yeah, that maybe I had something. But you got
to a point where you didn't care about what the results were. It seemed like, I don't know.
I think that's when I started realizing that having the authenticity come through a little bit matters a little bit more.
Yeah. Because everyone probably has the same answer.
Yeah, probably, right? Like, I volunteer or I do something.
Yeah. Did they follow up on that? So where's this guacamole dish?
Yeah. So the recruiter that that hired me, she wasn't the one that saw my application, so it got passed around internally. But they did end up flying me out. They made an offer. They you know, and man, I remember walking into my interview and in San Francisco, and like that was like my first taste of like Silicon Valley. Right?
Are there several rounds?
There's usually like a phone call with the recruiter.
Okay.
Right, and then if that goes well, the recruiter will connect you with a hiring manager who's hiring for the role.
Okay.
And then if that goes well, they usually do some type of like on-site interview where it's like 4 or 5 rounds.
Is that in a day or amongst several days?
It's usually in a day.
Oh, wow.
So it can be a pretty long process.
Yeah, that's okay. And is that what happened?
Yeah, so that's what happened. They flew me out.
Yeah,
this is back when, like, you know, people were being flown out for interviews, and you know, the whole experience to me, I was just happy to even make it that far, right? Because I was certainly an outsider in the sense that a lot of people had that Silicon Valley experience. Even though I was in tech at Accenture, it wasn't quite like Silicon Valley tech. And I remember I showed up in my interview with a dress shirt and some slacks, nothing too dressed up, but also nothing like too casual.
Yeah.
And I just remember feeling so out of place. Like, oh man, I'm overdressed.
Were they jeans and hoodie type?
Yeah, it was definitely jeans and hoodies. It was like sandals and shorts.
Wow.
in some of the places, besides the legal team where I looked over, I'm like, okay, those are lawyers. But I just remember being like, hey, if this works out, like, you know, I'm going to be so grateful kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So there was a point where you realized that you're getting far in this process, but do you have to remind yourself to never lose your authenticity?
Yeah. I mean, you know, at that point I was confident in the sense that, like, I had experience like managing teams. I've, you know, have experience recruiting. I don't necessarily know if, like, I validated it at like the Uber scale, right? But I also have a lot of other things going on in my life. Like, I'm really excited for my wife's, you know, or my girlfriend at the time, her move, and this opportunity to come along for the journey.
Yeah, I mean, so because at this point, you needed this, like, if you wanted to be with her out west, right? So I'm sure there was that pressure to get the role. Yeah.
And spoiler alert, Google didn't work out, and that was the first interview. And I remember feeling really bummed because, you know, Google was the dream job. That's where everybody wanted to work. And you know, I thought I had done well, and I remember getting the call and just feeling like, man, I'm not going to be able to move out to San Francisco.
In that call, were they reassuring at all, or did they explain why?
They usually don't. A lot of companies will not share too much because it can be a gray area in terms of like liability if they share too much and things like that. So sometimes companies have like a blanket policy on that stuff. I was told I did well in the interview, and then Google has a process where it has to go to like hiring committee, and then like a committee makes the decision. And for whatever reason, I didn't get through the hiring committee. But only 2 weeks later, I got the call from Uber, and they wanted to move forward, and I was ecstatic. And I remember like my uncle and my parents were happy too, but my uncle, I remember him being like, I don't know about this Uber company. It sounds very sketchy. Like, is this going to work out? And I was like, no, they're like really, and this is like 2016.
So how much like pre-interview did you do a lot of research on Uber?
Oh yeah. Okay. I mean, as much as I can, right?
Yeah.
Like with the available material, I'm reaching out to some of the mentors in my network, asking questions about like what I think they're going to ask me and things like that. And I did a lot of homework to make sure that I could show up. Looking back today, I can tell you that a lot of the time, these companies, they want to understand how people work within ambiguity, right? Like they're looking for problem solvers. So to a degree, you can prepare and you should prepare around a lot of these topics, but you should also think about how to navigate situations where there's a lot of ambiguity, because that's the nature of...
Like where there's not necessarily a right or wrong?
Yeah, right? Like for example, one of the questions I remember being asked was like, hey, we're Google. We just hired, I think, we just acquired Nest at the time. Nest, the hardware company, right? Wow. We got to hire like 50 roles for this new group, and that's the ask. You've got like a team of 3 people. Like, how would you approach it? It's very open-ended.
Oh wow,
yeah, very open-ended. So then you got to think through like all of the different dimensions of like, what are you looking for? What, where can you think about like not reinventing the wheel? Where does the talent lie? What kind of talent mapping do you have to do? And it's an opportunity for you to engage in a conversation around the nature of your approach. And this is specific to recruiting, but you can also extrapolate this into different roles. Like in software engineering, you're talking about tech infrastructure, and different job functions have different things you can kind of.
I love that. That's great. I love that.
So by the time that like I had finished, the Google and Uber interview processes, like I kind of had a taste of Silicon Valley a little bit. I got the job. It was a big moment, like leaving Chicago. I thought I never would. We go to San Francisco, and we decided to get a place in Oakland, downtown Oakland, because my wife was working in East Bay, and I was downtown San Francisco, and it was awesome. Like it was very different from Chicago. Oakland culture was very different from San Francisco culture. The food scene was different, and I met so many people in those first 3 months, and everyone had like a different thing that they were excited about, and I was just excited to be there and learn right, and go out and experience all these new areas of life. And that was on the personal side, and on the professional side, I was like, whoa, this is different. Like, okay, Uber was special in the sense that like it was a very special time in 2016. It was the largest, pre-IPO startup. Everybody wanted to work there in 2016. And then I quickly realized like, engineers are getting like $1 million offers here.
Wow.
So it was like a different league than I had operated at before.
Wow.
So I was of course telling my cousins back home, like, yeah, you should get a tech job.
Okay. So, and what were your day-to-day tasks then when starting then, when you made the move and you're starting your job?
Yeah. So at Uber, I was hiring for mobile engineers. So it was like helping staff their mobile platform teams.
Wow.
Eventually, like I would help with Uber for Business and Uber Eats.
Wow.
And a lot of it were software engineers, and there were some specialized roles like research scientist roles, and they're very specific, and they required like, an L1 visa, which is like a visa that demonstrates like extraordinary ability, meaning like there's not a lot of people in the world that like can do this job and skill set.
So an O1 visa.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It's a type of visa that they grant for individuals who are like really specialists in their
this is
field.
International.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
So sometimes, sometimes you can, bring in that talent from abroad.
Wow. I wonder what it takes to apply for an O1 or like to be what kind of agency do you need to be able to be looking for O1 visas?
You mean from like a recruiting perspective?
From a company perspective.
A lot of the times those individuals are very established in their field. Like they would have written papers. They have, maybe like PhD level education. They're kind of experts in their field.
So that's coming from the individual's perspective, but like, is there anything about Uber or can anyone be looking for individuals that are seeking O1 visa status?
I think it's more, I don't think companies generally necessarily go out and target O1 visas.
Okay.
It's more like sometimes folks tend to be able to get O1 visas, and I think the O1 visa itself in this scenario that I'm describing, it speaks to kind of a function of like how specialized they really are, right?
Gotcha.
Because normally, if you're hiring somebody, let's say abroad, they might have like an H-1B visa, or they might have like another international visa, which is more typical, and that's kind of the.
And is that? Do you find it just cost effective, or because they are truly experts in their field?
It is not cost effective. It is an expensive process.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
good. I always wonder about that. It's like, are we taking advantage of like international individuals?
Yeah, no, I would say that it all kind of comes down to the companies here at play too.
Okay.
There's I know like the H-1B topic has been like hotly debated in the last few months with, the recent election cycle and things like that. But I think that, and I've had the experience of and pleasure of recruiting internationally too, right? Like in Mexico and Toronto and things like that. There's talent everywhere, and I think we would be doing an injustice not to like uncover some of that talent, and give people opportunity where it makes sense to give them opportunity.
Do you notice is like a certain part of the world hungrier for work, or is it kind of sporadic?
I think certain populations and cities have better infrastructure that incubate more ideas and therefore provide more opportunities. So you're going to see some of these hubs start to emerge. From a visa standpoint, it's a little bit easier to get folks from, Canada or Mexico or Singapore or Australia into the United States.
Okay.
Just because of the visa policy there. So, companies like Uber and Amazon and other giants would do these international batch recruiting events where they would go to Sydney, they would interview like 40, 50 candidates a week, and then maybe out of that, like 5 people get offers, and they would relocate them back.
Wow. From a growth perspective, what did you notice about yourself professionally and personally? Like around this time, like making a move with a significant other, do you find yourselves having conversation of like, do we want to stay here? Do we want to go back home to Chicago? And I know that's not the case immediately, but like, what are we doing? And then I'm sure you grew a lot professionally as well. Yeah.
Well, I didn't have to wait too long to find an answer, because 3 or 4 months into it, my wife was like, I don't like this job. I hate it.
Oh, okay.
She's like, I want to quit. And I was like, great. We're only in the most expensive city in the world. Right. And I'm like, how are we gonna get through this kind of thing? And she starts looking at jobs again, and she lands. There were 2 opportunities. One was West Coast based with a little bit of travel, and the other one was in the East Coast. It was in New Jersey. And same conversation, where I'm like, do what you got to do what you think is the right thing to do here.
What a great partner.
Thank you. I'll let you share that with her directly. So I encourage her to move, and like, you know, from her side, like, kudos to her too, right? She's kind of paving the path here. She's going to San Francisco before me, you know, laying down some of the groundwork down. And then she decides to make the move across the country again to New Jersey. And I'm telling her, like, I'll find a way to get out there. And I ended up being able to transfer with Uber. It wasn't easy. Like, you know,
It's like you just got here.
Yeah. So at the time I'd been there for like a year.
Okay.
So you know, she took a little bit of time off, and it was still kind of, you know, a challenging task in the sense that, like, hey, I just relocated here, been here for a year. Now I'm asking to move out to New York. And, you know, it was either that or look for opportunities outside, right?
Sure.
And see what was available. So she left, and I was like, okay, Cali I get, right? But I'm like, why would I ever want to move to New York? Like, it's cold. It's just like Chicago, except it's dirtier, and like pizza's not good. I'm kidding.
It's, people are coming for you now.
This is 2016, Jeff. And so she moves out there, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna spend a week there over the summer to go check it out.
Oh, so you agreed to just kind of separate for a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was it wasn't too long, maybe like a month or two. I was by myself, letting the lease run out.
Okay.
And I went out there, and I loved it. It was amazing. That 1 week walking around Washington Square Park, and, you know, Chelsea, and taking in the sights and sounds. And it's, you know, it's hard to describe, but there's really just an energy about the place that you can't replicate. And I fell in love, and I was like, all right, I got to make this happen. And so I went back to California, and I told my manager at the time, like, I'm going. I would love to do it with Uber if I can, kind of thing. And they finally agreed to it, and I moved out there in 2017, and then a few months after, I proposed, because I'm like, I'm not gonna chase you around the country anymore.
I mean, I will, but if we're gonna be married doing it.
Yeah, we're gonna be married, right? So that was like our transition there, and New York was really my professional growth, because I had come into a satellite office. It needed to be completely turned around. We needed to hire like a new team.
Oh, okay.
Uber Eats was on this trajectory to 10x, which is you know, a lot of growth in startup terms, and I was helping kind of rebuild the entire like recruiting process and strategy for that office. And I've met some like incredible coworkers along the way, folks that like I still keep in touch with. And we kind of had our own cool thing going on in New York for a while. Like we were like the number one performing, you know, tech recruiting team in the company. We 10x'd with Uber Eats. You know, I had like Uber Eats credits that we were getting.
Yeah.
We got to experience all of the sights and sounds of New York.
Wow.
And I thought we were going to live there forever, basically.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was sold. I was there. Technically we were in Weehawken, which is in New Jersey.
Okay. North
of Hoboken, right across from Hell's Kitchen, because my wife at the time worked in Jersey, and I was working downtown in Manhattan.
Okay.
So
I guess to that point, it's like, what makes someone a better fit for Uber Eats rather than Uber?
It's largely the same company at that time, right?
Yeah.
It was basically a division that kind of grew to the point where it could be considered its own startup or own company within the company, kind of thing. And, you know, they had processes that were kind of somewhat unique to them, but also very, you know, universal with like larger Uber strategy. That wasn't the case with Uber Freight, which I
haven't even heard of that.
Yeah, Uber Freight has a presence.
They're trying to compete with FedEx and UPS?
Well, they're a little bit different in the sense that it's more like around logistics and logistics in the sense of like shippers and carriers and moving cargo around. And think Uber, except for like truck drivers
like
and
Amazon?
like trucks.
So would Amazon be more of a competitor than FedEx and UPS?
They all kind of can be a competitor in the sense that like Uber Freight has its own enterprise version where they will, work with some of like your bigger companies and provide fleet services there. But then they'll also match like independent like truck drivers to loads, kind of like what Flexport was doing. And what's the other one here in Chicago?
That's another industry I like. I know just a little bit about, or enough about. We have a cousin who is crushing it at Coyote Logistics.
Yeah, Coyote. That's the other one. Yeah. So same industry basically. So I had the opportunity to come back to Chicago to actually help stand up Uber Freight tech recruiting here in Chicago.
Okay.
So I turned to my wife and I was like, hey, now you got to follow me. And in November 2019, we made the move back to Chicago.
Wow.
And it was very cool. It was like a homecoming moment for me in the sense that like I get to help bring tech jobs to like the city at the scale that is like Uber and like that level of talent density. I was like, this is awesome. And
was it hard for your fiance at the time to leave, or is she more of a there's a means to an end, like I'm gonna do what I got to do to afford the lifestyle I want to live?
It was harder for me to leave.
Oh wow.
I think a part of her wanted to come back to Chicago. Both of our families are here. I've got a pretty big family, so I think there was this like eventual return back to Chicago plan, but it was, for me, it was like
when you were on either coast, how often would you guys kind of see each other's families?
We would fly back maybe like twice every 6 months or something like that.
Okay, but you're primarily making the trip.
No, we would come back together.
No, I mean like your families wouldn't come out to you guys.
Yeah, it's us basically.
Okay.
Like my family came out once to visit in Cali as well as New York.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I mean, then you start thinking about like if eventually adding, children to the mix, and you want the proximity of like the families there and things like that. So I think it was something that was always on our radar. Just wasn't sure how it was going to happen.
Is there anything that like once you knew you might have been coming back to Chicago that you like had a checklist of things to do in New York or New Jersey that you wanted to run through?
Yeah, New York was so cool for me because I got to meet so many people because everybody goes through New York, right? New York was different in the sense that in San Francisco, it's primarily a tech hub. So everyone you meet is going to be in tech. But in New York, you got the tech people, you got the finance people, you got, all kinds of people, which was really cool. It felt like a melting pot. And I got to meet authors. I got to go to shows. I got to see all these people and experience all these events that I didn't necessarily have access to before. So I had a hard time letting go of that.
Oh, okay. Well, I wonder if there was part of you that felt like you could recreate it in Chicago.
That's something that like I toy with in my head a little bit, and I think about what makes it unique, and I've got this theory that like information takes a little bit longer time to get to Chicago. It hits the coast first.
Huh.
So you see some of these styles, trends, and other things emerge in the coast first, and sometimes to the negative, right? Like it can be an echo chamber there for people out in Silicon Valley. And sometimes Chicago's like isolated from that.
That's got to be exhausting though, keeping up with trends.
Oh yeah. When I was in California, I was like, all right, Patagonia, this, got it down. Then I moved to New York and I'm like, wearing like John Elliott, this, that. And I'm like, all right. Now I've been working from home for 5 years and I'm like, all right, this is it. So it was cool. Everything was new. The novelty that I so crave was around the corner. And I knew while I was living there that like this was a very special time in my life, and like I knew that I was going to look back on it and remember it fondly.
Okay.
So all this to say, like I think a part of it was because of community. So it goes back to being able to kind of create community here.
Yeah.
And you do. I feel like you do a great job of that
Trying.
to some degree, right?
And when I say I'm trying, like I do want these things. But then I ask myself, like, why? Why do I want this thing? Why do I want community so bad? Why? I know being at home with the wife and eventually kids is enough.
Yeah.
Why do I want this community?
Yeah. Some people are just naturally hubs, man. Like, some people are naturally attractors. And I think they're, whether they're completely aware of it or not, like they're facilitating those aspects of community. And sometimes it can be steered, and sometimes, it's just, you just got to let it bloom on its own, I feel like.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an egoic part to it of like achieving status and association and affiliation. And I guess they're not necessarily bad things. It's kind of like, how do you use them eventually?
Yeah.
But I guess reminding yourself that whatever you have at the moment is enough.
Yeah.
And if anything were to happen or grow, is a bonus on top.
Yeah. Like I love it when people that I introduce, like,
yeah, they start connecting.
They're hanging out without you, right? Like, that's awesome.
Where was my invite?
So I do think there is there is maybe a pathway here to create some of that magic in Chicago. That would be awesome. Yeah.
So when you moved at the same time back home?
Yeah, we drove that, packed everything up, our 1-bedroom studio and our 1-bedroom apartment, and
it was, and I'm guessing it was smaller than your West Loop apartment.
Yeah. It was smaller.
But you're paying for the area or the walkability, and
you're basically paying for
kind of what we say about West Loop right now.
Yeah. It was, well, at least in New York, I had a nice view of the skyline and the Hudson.
Wow.
In Oakland, that was not the case. I was looking at like the Clorox building. it was pretty dry. And there was like a federal prison like on the other side too. That was like, it was a weird location for the prison.
Yeah.
In the city, but the walkability is the one thing. Like, the proximity. It introduces like the connections again.
It does make you wonder, like how, like because you probably make, I don't know if were you making pretty much similar income on East Coast and West Coast as well as Midwest?
I got I got a bump when I moved out to California, and I got a bump when I moved out to New York.
So it kept getting higher.
Yeah.
That's wild. But like cost of living is probably higher on both coasts either as well, right?
Yes.
So then if you're making more, now you're coming back to the Midwest.
Right. And that's where you can take advantage of like this disconnect, and like now you have the experience and the skills, and you can get maybe not the same as you were getting in New York, but good enough to offset like, the cost of living here.
Yeah. Wow. That's great.
Yeah, it was. So we were like, hey, let's save up and buy a house, and that was kind of the thinking. We're like, we can live. My parents were gracious enough to allow us to live with them for like a few months while we were looking for offers, and it was supposed to be like a 2-month ordeal that turned into a year because of COVID.
Oh, okay.
And when my daughter was born and she came home to like my parents' house and things like that, and so we were like living under one roof, big happy family.
Wow.
But post our COVID experience, so filled with a little bit more gratitude and everything.
Do they remember those times?
Your
daughter remember?
I remember my brother, who was a pharmacist down in Peoria at the time. Actually, he was in Springfield at the time, and he's like, "Should I come up?" Because like everybody was like sick and stuff. And I was like, "No, you don't need to come up. We'll be okay." And he was like, "What if Dad doesn't make it?" Like he's
valid, yeah.
He's the pharmacist, right? He's like talking to me about pneumonia, all this stuff, and like we don't know what COVID is. We're still like figuring out all this, and I'm not letting that reality enter my mind. And I'm like, "We'll be okay. He's gonna be fine. We're gonna be good on the other side of it." So that it was like that type of experience, which people have these experiences in life, and they kind of redefine perspective for people. So it was great to have that coming into becoming a father, because like then for me becoming a father,
That intimacy,
the
or the realization,
the realization of like how precious life is.
Okay.
Yeah. And
did you feel like you and your dad got closer?
Yeah. A lot of that came naturally just becoming a father and like understanding like what maybe my dad was going through, and then raising us, right?
And then getting to, I'm sure he was a lot softer as a grandfather.
Oh yeah. They're and it's a beautiful thing to see them interact with the kids too, right? Like, and I think about like how I wouldn't have that on a regular basis if I wasn't here.
Yeah. So,
it was, and I speak for everybody in my family. I think like that then turned toward like we were like so scared. We were like, should we tell people we have COVID? I'm not sure, because nobody else had COVID at the time, and it was such a strange experience. And then, fast forward a few years later, and like, wow, like how 180 the narrative became around everything that was going on in that period, right?
Right.
And I think that was like, I think of these moments in life where like I was in 8th grade in 9/11. Like after 9/11, that was like a turning point.
Yeah.
And then maybe the financial crisis, I wasn't really old enough to feel the implications or anything like that.
Yeah.
But then COVID, that was the one where it was just like, whoa.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
And people have already forgotten like the
how easily we forget.
Yeah. So
I remember like people just giving shit for other people wearing masks.
Yeah.
And then masks became mandated.
Yeah.
And I know people give like the government shit for shutting businesses down and things like that, and especially small business owners. I get it. Like it's tough to keep your doors open, and as a restaurant to limit your capacity to 25%. How are you supposed to make any money to survive? And so you have restaurants closing, and I guess like you don't know what to do, and so what you have to do is kind of play it safe. And it's just like, on the other side, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah. Even in the workforce, there was some interesting situations where when companies started making the vaccination a part of their the employment process and things like that.
It's interesting. It's like no one's asking for those vaccination cards anymore.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's like there was a time where you had to present it to even get into a restaurant, certain restaurants.
Yeah. I remember that.
And then if you didn't have it, you go, okay, they're not. I can't go. I'm not going to go there, and that's it. But then now it's gone. You know, it's like you don't have to prove anything.
Yeah. I think there's a lot for our generation to unpack there with with COVID, but I also think that in some ways, like I've been working remotely from COVID since 2020. I feel like I'm one of the few that still have the privilege of being able to do that.
A lot of companies are incentivizing coming back, right? Back to the office.
Most companies are in like a hybrid model.
Okay.
I mean, when you think about it, there's certainly value in.
But even a hybrid model, when you do come in, you don't come in often enough to know your peers.
That's where it gets tricky, right? Like, especially if you're like, let's say you're working for one of these companies and you're coming in downtown, but your entire team is like in Seattle or something like that, and you're not really interacting on a day-to-day basis with the folks that sit next to you in the office. Like, does that make sense?
Kind of feel like an outsider.
Yeah. That's where I think people struggle with this return back to the office scenario. I think that.
But also, do you really need to show face? Like, can the work be done?
It depends on the function of the job, right?
Yeah.
I think there are some jobs where you get paid a lot of money and people don't care about when you clock in, just you want the results there, right? Whether you're doing your work at night or whatnot, it really doesn't matter. There are other jobs that like require a sense of, collaboration in the sense that you're hiring more junior employees into the company. They need guardrails. They need a framework to kind of advance their career.
Your presence is part of the culture.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's great arguments on both sides of this.
Cool.
I just know that some companies now have just completely embraced remote first, and there's not a lot of them, but the ones that do like lean into it, and others are still trying to figure out, what this new hybrid model is looking like.
Cool. So, tell me, like, how you wore many more hats, I'm sure, when you came back to Chicago as you were building this more from the ground. How did you then grow as a professional in Chicago?
It was cool because I was doing things like interacting with World Business Chicago and helping set up Uber Freight into all of these, local communities as a potential employer, and partnering with the city, partnering with places like Northwestern, all things that like I found incredibly grateful to be at the intersection of. And I was back to kind of managing a team again, and finding myself in this people manager role. And one of my connections that I knew from earlier in my career had reached out to me about a potential opportunity to work at the company he was at, and that company being Netflix.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa, like Netflix is hiring people in Chicago? Like they're hiring remote? Like that's a thing? I didn't even realize that, right?
Yeah.
So long story short, I interviewed there. I got the job. So I've been there for like the last 3 years supporting their streaming engineering teams, and more or less the same type of job that I have been doing, but in a different area, still working remote, still trying to kind of plug into that same community.
What was it hard to leave Uber at all?
It was because I was in a manager role at that point. I was helping lead the recruiting function for Uber Freight. I felt, I'd worked hard to get there. I was there for almost like 5 years.
Yeah.
So it was hard to leave because Uber was my education, right? That was like my journey across different sites. It was my journey into learning about all of these things that happen between the lines a little bit, right?
Sure.
But I also knew that Netflix doesn't always come knocking either. And it was a move into an IC role, like an individual contributor role.
Okay, what does that mean?
So I wouldn't be responsible for managing a team. I wouldn't be in like a people management function. I would be more focused on like the execution piece of like finding people and scaling a team, and being kind of a talent partner to a specific business unit.
So more responsibility. Or
different responsibility.
Okay.
Just not. So now I'm not directly responsible for the growth and development of a team.
Okay. But more so, is it results? Different results focus? Like, yeah.
Yeah, you're being more of like a talent consultant to the business and a talent partner, and you're thinking about how to hire the right people. Like there's a lot that goes into thinking about how to hire even before you decide to hire.
Does this go beyond the technical aspect then?
Yeah, definitely. So
do you essentially have podcasts with your applicants? Like
there's a lot of questions, right? I think about how many interviews have I done over the course of my career. It's got to be in the thousands, and they're not always as fun and interesting. Sometimes it can get very monotonous, but you're trying to. I think one of the misconceptions about like recruiting and hiring is that you're essentially a piece of the puzzle, and the company is the larger puzzle board. So what they're looking for often really comes down to like finding that perfect puzzle piece to fit in their vacancy.
Yeah.
And you can have the right qualifications, you can, have the skills, you might know somebody in there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll kind of fit that puzzle. Because What's on the other side of it is what's additive to the team. Like, how is that team thinking about the individual that they're hiring beyond just the raw technical skills? Like, maybe what's complementary to that team is somebody that's a little bit more extroverted and can go and evangelize some of the work that the team is doing. Maybe the superpower that they need on the team is somebody that's really good in like a specific technology or something, right? Like, so there's a lot of different dimensions that don't completely appear on the surface level, especially in a job description.
Wow. Yeah. So what questions tease out these traits?
So I encourage candidates to ask throughout the hiring process the tough questions, right? Like, interviewing is a two-way street. As much as you are being interviewed on your qualifications, it's also an opportunity for you to understand the environment that you're stepping into. And a lot of the times, getting signal on like, who's doing this job now, who was doing it before, why did this person leave, what's going well, what isn't.
And you'd be transparent with that.
Well, if asked the question, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I would be doing myself and the person a disservice, right, for them to be misinformed about the opportunity that they're stepping into.
No, these are great questions. I mean, a curiosity shows they care.
Yeah. And I think sometimes people can get lost in trying to say the thing that they think people want to hear, right, on the other side of it. And it's very easy from where I sit to like sense that and flush it out.
We just had an episode with our EMT instructors as they wrap up interviews for residency. And so there were three of them, and then a fourth is a first-year resident. And so they were reflecting on that process of interviewing, bringing their authentic self forward, as well as showcasing a curiosity about the program they're interviewing for and whether or not that program would be a good fit. So, which reminded me of that. That's amazing.
The curiosity is a big one.
Yeah.
There should be no instance where you're wrapping up the interview and the interviewer is asking if you have any more questions. There should be no scenario where you're like, no, I'm good. I think I've got all my questions answered. Even if you have, even if you feel like you've had a lot of your questions answered already and you have really good context on the role and the position, if this was your first day, like, what would your questions be, right?
That's a good way to put it. Because I wonder if they don't have any questions because maybe they feel they're too silly.
It's possible.
You don't want to look stupid, right? It's just like, but that's a good way to put it. It's like on day, if this was your day one, like, what would you be curious about?
Sometimes people are burnt out, right? Like
so from your perspective, you probably do your best to create a safe space.
Yeah. I mean, I try to, let them know that I run a transparent process, and I think that goes a long way in building trust and rapport, especially when it gets to later stages in the process of like, finding a team or negotiating a salary and things like that. Okay.
So, what's the market like now? Is it saturated? Is there still demand? Like, what's it looking like?
It's tough. It's tough to get a job in tech. And just to paint a picture of like how insanely competitive tech is. And this is before, all of this AI stuff and before COVID. I remember one year at Uber, we had like 1 million applications and we hired maybe 2,000 people that year.
Wow. Oh my God.
That's like a 2% acceptance rate, right? And for comparison, I think Harvard's acceptance rate, like for their last incoming class, is like 3.7 or something. They hire like 2,000 people out of like 60,000 applicants. So it is very hard to get a job in tech, and it's even harder now because you have a lot of layoffs. You have a really saturated pool of folks who are qualified looking for the same positions. You have new grads that are entering the market, and you have generative AI, which has changed the landscape, right? So it's hard, but I also think it's the best time ever to leverage some of these advancements in technology to help you succeed in the process, right?
In what way?
I mean, anybody who is looking for a job and hasn't put their resume into like ChatGPT already should start there to see like what it can give you in terms of like useful tips. I think if you have like the $20 version, they even have a field where it's specifically focused on like analyzing your resume.
Oh my God.
And you can just plug it in, and I've messed around with it, and I'm like, I help my friends and family out with reviewing their resumes, and I'm like, this is doing what I do better and like faster, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just for you to kind of prepare on aspects of your resume. But just even spending some time with some of these generative AI models and being familiar with it, I think will be helpful for you to learn, because
God, it's like a Seth Godin, like it's like Claude is his best friend.
It's like, if you can imagine it, you can do it, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy to me how fast this is happening. I think when ChatGPT went mainstream 2 years ago,
yeah,
we were like, oh, cool, like a chat bot, like it's answering some of the prompts.
What did I read? I don't know if it was Seth Godin that said this, but Google's disappearing. Like,
Google is worried about protecting their moat for sure, because now I turn to like Perplexity, and like I get a straightforward answer, right?
Yeah,
and I don't have to weed through these Reddit
sponsored
comments.
ads and yeah, exactly.
So I do think that the entire landscape is changing, but I also think that you have all of this like access to information and tools like you've never had before, and anything that seems like a very complex and challenging task can be broken down into parts, and you can work with a GPT to figure out answers to some of those questions and logically work your way through that.
Yeah. Do you notice people in tech leaving for other industries?
I know a lot of folks in recruiting have left just because it's been tough for recruiters as well, just because there's been a lot of layoffs. And
does that mean like leaving the recruiting role altogether, or just tech?
Some have shifted into other industries. Some have gone into like program manager roles. And I think others have kind of used this, zeitgeist moment with AI to do more entrepreneurial efforts. I think that's the other cool thing that AI is enabling. Like, now you can do super niche things, and you can validate your ideas really quickly without a lot of investment up front. So like, before maybe you needed to hire somebody, you needed to hire this person.
Consultants.
Yeah. Now you can just kind of kick something around and see if there's any stickiness there.
Yeah, so there's so much opportunity there. Does that inspire you to do something of your own?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's analysis paralysis a little bit sometimes. Okay. Because of the direction or the different directions you can go. Yeah. I think for me personally, I think about, how do I leverage some aspects of, my network and my interest in, creative pursuits, whether it's like photography or film, to maybe be able to tell meaningful stories. I've always been drawn to stories. I think everything is storytelling. Mm-hmm. Like the candidate experience is storytelling about yourself. Mm-hmm. The employer branding experience is telling a story about the company. Movies are,
So it's picking which story to tell?
I think so, and finding those stories that are maybe not so obvious.
Yeah.
There's a I guess a satisfaction in the journey of like uncovering those stories.
Okay. And if I were to go back to school, I think journalism would be one of those things I might want to tackle.
Yeah. It's and photojournalism would be kind of like the icing on the cake there, right?
Yeah.
Just being able to combine all that. But it's the other stat that I remember reading was, I think writing jobs are down like 30% since the advent of like generative AI. So people are still going to want like human connection and value. I think, one of my recruiter friends asked me like, hey, do you think there's still going to be a need for recruiters. And my answer is yes, because, if I'm a top software engineer looking to apply at a place like Google or something like that, I'm going to value wanting to talk to a person. Like, I don't want to be talking to a robot at that point, right? So,
but is that what Google's going to think?
I think they're going to balance some of that, and I worry about the middle engineer or the middle class kind of getting eliminated in that sense. You're still going to have your movers and shakers that are working on like super cutting edge things, that are getting paid the big bucks to kind of, launch rockets into space or write the next infrastructure of the internet. But a lot of the, what is maybe in the middle row now can be automated, right? And I think
reminds me of Elon.
Yeah.
Tell me what you did this week.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, man, savage, right? I have an uncle who works for the federal government, and when I was in Dallas for the wedding, we were like chatting about it live. He's like, "Did you see the?" He's like, "I got the email." I'm like, "Oh my god, that's crazy!" Like, that's crazy. I'm like, "Are you going to respond?" He's like, "I don't know. I think
they were
Monday
told
off."
not to respond.
Well, he had taken Monday off for the wedding, right? So I'm like, "What are you going to do?" He's like, "I don't know." And then like by then, like the agencies were saying like, "Don't respond," things like that. Yeah.
Well, honestly, like I wonder if it's hard to come up with, statements of what you do. If the work is that ambiguous, I don't know, like, or it's like for yourself, wouldn't you want to be able to?
I think most people who work hard at their jobs can probably easily, talk about a few of the challenging things that they did throughout the week. I don't know if it felt like he was just applying the Twitter playbook of like, hey, let me see if this person responds, and if they don't, maybe like this is just like a lost, like somebody that's like a glitch in the matrix, right? And like he was just shaking the tree to see like what is actually sticking.
Yeah.
But I also know that like a lot of people don't appreciate the tone, the approach,
how you do, how you say something or how you do something matters as well. I saw a clip, I don't know how recent the clip was, but it was from Joe Rogan and Elon was on, and he was like, yeah, there's no bounce checks in federal government.
There's no
checks that bounce.
Oh,
He says there's like hundreds of billions of dollars that get lost in couch cushions.
That's wild. I mean, it's wild if even a piece of that is true, right? Like a percentage of that is true. I'm not really sure, man. I think that there is a lot of uncertainty right now, whether it's in the markets or the government or with how people are feeling about the natural, the state of the country right now. I think that's a great opportunity to lean into the humanness and human aspect and human connection.
I 100% agree, and it's hard to, if you're coming from a place of fear.
Yeah.
It's hard to leave that state of fear.
Yeah. Especially when they monetize the fear in some sense, right? It's the engagement on the platforms. It's the discussion, whether that's trolling or whatever clickbaity articles might be there for you to read. And how do you sift through the noise, right? And that's where I think there at least for myself, I have a longing for wanting to do things outside of the domain of like the virtual world, right?
Sure.
Like just whether it's connect back in nature or meet people at a coffee shop or just do things away from this I guess infrastructure that we're all plugged into 24/7.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to continue as the years go on, and there's going to be a longing for connection in that sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, at this point, like, is there a topic or a subject or a person whose story you want to tell?
I always think about, maybe my origin story a little bit, and not specifically for me, but the journey of my family and how they immigrated here, starting with my aunt and what she's kind of been through. She came here in the 70s and helped bring some of my family here.
And your aunts, they're still around?
My aunt is still around now, and she's lived this incredible life and with ups and downs, and there's like a beautiful story there to unpack.
Yeah. Is she willing to unpack it?
I wouldn't want to do it disservice either. So I'm trying to think about what ways I can set up, the framework to tease out some of this and maybe inject some of my journey in it as well.
Sure.
And I'm sure the experience there can be relatable for other folks that have also maybe come here from different communities. So that that's one aspect. I think the other aspects that occupy my mind these days are around connection to neighborhoods, and I think this is where there's more for me to learn and understand, because I'm in a northern suburb right now, and there is a community there, but it's something that I haven't quite explored, and wanting to get a sense of what kind of stories live there too, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's what you mean by neighborhoods, not necessarily the city neighborhoods, but just especially the spaces you occupy.
The city neighborhoods are cool and easy to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
There is there's a lot of variety.
Yeah.
Every few blocks, and the suburban neighborhoods are more uniform and it's different, and but there's still interesting conversations going on, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is going to be through photos or video or a combination of both.
Maybe a combination of both.
Yeah.
I think when I reached out to you, it was to get a sense of like, hey, how do you approach balancing some of the creative pursuits with the storytelling. And I think I'm at the research part of that journey. I feel like I've met so many cool and wonderful, interesting people along the way.
How did you land on Eric Floberg? Because I think he lives in Park Ridge. I originally discovered him through his YouTube channel. Okay.
And then following some of his photography work, and that's where I saw some of the snaps for Fernwood.
Fernwood, yeah.
That's what led me down the rabbit hole here.
Yeah, it's wild. I landed on him through wedding photography when I was trying to get into that world.
Got it.
And then it just that Venn diagram moment, because I was getting my hair cut at Fernwood at the time, and him just providing some beautiful videos for Fernwood, and I was like, what? Like, he goes to Fernwood too? And
I think
and how transparent he is, like, with everything, with the business end and side hustles and passive income and whatnot.
Yeah, there's and I just get inspired, man. Every time I see somebody in their element doing something that lights them up, it lights me up. And I do have to think a little bit more about the application here. I've been, as you know, using my camera a little bit more, so I think I'm going to continue to leverage that. And I've had some folks reach out about potentially some shoots. So that's something that I think I'm starting to take a little bit more seriously.
So is this your way of trying to monetize this skill, or these are these people that want these services are still stories you want to tell?
Both, right? Okay. I'm looking for the angle of the story, because I don't think trying to monetize anything too early is going to be that beneficial.
And how lucky are we to not be at the whims of that?
Right, right. Where it isn't like a constraining force here.
I did a venue walkthrough for a couple that I'm shooting this year, and I sorry if there's any other couple listening, but I feel like there's only one. I'm only shooting one wedding. Yeah. This year, but I'm like, because when I say that, I mean as a lead photographer. I'm probably doing a handful of seconds for another photographer, but it's a big kind of undertaking, especially because I don't charge what the average wedding photographer charges. I undercharge because I don't feel like I'm that good. I'm great though, but I'm not that to the point where it's not my day job. Yeah. And you see it from a wedding vendor's perspective that the middle class is shrinking. There's not a lot of inquiries for mid-level packages. So you see a growth in higher packages, people balling out on weddings, or people just wanting kind of short, let's go to City Hall type.
I think I've seen that weddings too. Yeah, it's expensive to get married, man.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially if you have a large family. I know a lot of Indian families, like they deal with this conflict of like, hey, we've got 200 plus people to invite. How are we going to do this?
Yeah.
So I think going back to the creative side, like the when I compare like and contrast like the work of what I do on a 9 to 5,
Yeah.
it can be exhausting in its own way. But then the work of doing something creatively and applying your own lens and subjectivity to something and really putting yourself out there, that to me feels vulnerable, right? In ways maybe a desk job doesn't always.
Yeah, I think for me at this point, there are little opportunities here and there throughout teaching this EMT class to provide a greater perspective on life as a whole. Not that I'm trying to be motivational for the sake of being motivational, but I know these individuals are looking for something more meaningful, and they want their life to be meaningful, whether they're 17-year-olds or 25-year-olds or people that are having full day jobs and they're done with the 9 to 5 and they want something else. That wanting something else, like I can empathize with that, and those are like my little opportunities to share whatever I've been learning through this. Not that I'm like upselling this podcast at all, but if I can share any like little tidbits or wisdom, like I'd be happy to, and that has rejuvenated a sense of fulfillment from a vessel that was causing burnout at one point. Yeah,
and it's important to do that because you have to you got to take care of yourself first, right?
Yeah. And so do you think you're going to find a way to overlap these things, or is it going to be kind of exclusive to each other? And when I say exclusive, I guess in the literal sense, the camera to the tech world.
I don't know if there's a marriage there that's at least obvious to me right now. Yeah. Maybe there is. I think the storytelling piece of like in some regards, I feel like it's portraiture work, right? You're capturing these stories, and some of these stories are like moments of time, and I really want to be able to tell that through like a video lens, like a cinematic lens, and that's always kind of what I've been drawn to, highlighting some of the beauty and the positivity of this world, because I feel like there's a lot that you're just assaulted with in terms of like just raw, tough, complex things that come up throughout the day, whether it's like doom scrolling or news or whatnot, and heavy things, and within all of that, like I'm always inspired by these stories of simplicity that really kind of comes through when you give it room and space and time, and I think it's a longer project here that I'm noodling on.
Yeah, it makes me think of like going back and forth between allowing things to be what they are and like it is what it is type mentality versus wanting to have an effect on things.
Yeah. I could probably use a little bit more of the latter in this pursuit. Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art, right? Yeah. That's kind of what I'm doing with the one photo a day thing. But now it is a little bit more about like how to focus on those specific topics. One, and I think I shared this with you earlier. We've talked about novelty as being kind of a theme that I search for in my life. The other aspect is not nostalgia. Like if I'm not searching for novel ideas, I think about these moments of my life that I keep going back to, where I'm like, this was really a sweet slice of life, right? And you start to see it now on Instagram, where you've got these AI. Like here's the vibe of like 90s coming home playing GoldenEye or something like that, those type of things. So I do think there's like a longing for connecting with our past, as well as like searching for new ideas. Yeah. And the art of how this pendulum swings between these two concepts, I think there's something there for me to unpack. So. I think my creative vehicle will explore those themes in more detail.
So you said you had inquiries for photo work. Is that what you said?
Yeah, some photo work.
Is it portraits or is it like an event? Like is it a wedding or what?
So, one of it is an event. It's a basketball league.
Cool.
A couple of them are just like family portrait work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm starting small, humble photographer here.
Oh, and then you do a couple events, and if that's what you want to do, and then it'll go up. It'll go up from there.
Yeah.
Before I forget, like so you wanting to speak with your like why not set up a podcast with your aunt?
Yeah.
You think she'd be down?
Maybe. I think that would be an interesting format. I'm not sure if I'll be able to bring out the resolution of her story with like that same fidelity that's needed.
So you think someone else has to be the host?
I think someone else being the host can maybe allow for a form where like I'm not personally attached to it, but I think there's something there. Maybe it's a series of questions that open her up to the idea of like exploring this and sharing her story.
Yeah. So I feel like I've told you about this side project from the podcast, but that's something I'm starting, and I'm trying to think of 10 conversations to build a portfolio. And so these conversations, the only caveat is I want them to be public because I need this to gain traction. But then this is my one way of monetizing this equipment. But I can help people. I'm not involved. Maybe like I can tailor some questions, but like I'm not in the show. This isn't my show. The other caveat is it's not for commercial reasons. I'm not helping people, publish their podcast. But this is a conversation, and with these on, it's like you're so locked in the zone, and that it's almost inevitable if you ask the right questions that you learn something new and novel, or even just bring up nostalgia with each other. And that's like you and your partner, you and an aunt, you and your child. Yeah,
that's very cool. I think I do think that there's something there for me and my wife to maybe unpack a little bit.
Yeah. So you and think about that, and so I'm ordering like thumb drives, and I would deliver all the raw files. Now imagine you overlay old family footage or just B-roll.
That would be dope.
In the episode.
That would be dope. And I have a friend who is doing some of this with his son now also.
Yeah.
And I've seen a few videos, and it's documenting a moment in time, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I see a lot of potential.
Yeah. So the offer's there. I feel like this is a better way to do it. I was going to do should I do a giveaway? And I was like, I don't know. I think I'd want some sort of filter of like who I feel like could tease out. I think you'd be a great host, and I don't know your aunt, but I empathize with your hesitancy to maybe like, am I the right person to ask these questions? Because we have that question with our like grandparents as well.
Yeah.
Of like, are we the right people to make them feel comfortable enough to open up to that degree? But then it's like, I think you are. It's like, and I think we are as well. And I think these are important. And we did something similar at our wedding. We converted a bridal suite into a podcast studio, and like wedding guests would just hop in and share memories or wisdom. And that's like, at one point, it's like, should I pivot from a wedding photographer to a wedding podcaster? Like, should I just set this up in a bridal suite? And just, so it's so limitless that it's overwhelming, the number of opportunities. And how lucky are we to have all these opportunities? And at some point, you just pick one and go.
Yeah, like you can just do things, right? Yeah. I keep coming back to that, and I keep seeing people do things, incredible things, and I'm like, wow, you can just do things.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to ask as we're hitting the 2-hour mark?
Man, time flies here. This has been incredible. I think that what you're doing out here is great, and I've learned a lot listening to a lot of your conversations. So I really appreciate you. Just doing things in that theme.
Thank you.
Yeah. Nothing else. You can find me at Jeff Vaduk on Twitter, or jeffvaduk.com. Happy to always chat, especially on anything tech recruiting related or Chicago related or photography related.
Wow. Okay. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Till next time, see ya.
Peace.